So I want to talk about monogamy in male psychology. You say that monogamous marriage norms constrain the darker aspects of male psychology. Talk me through that.
Well, do I say darker? I hope I don't say darker.
No, that's my
Okay.
summary.
So, yeah. So the idea is that because of the differences in male and female biology, human males can benefit from multiple matings. And there's nothing about a pair bonding instinct. So gorillas have a pair bonding instinct that prevents you from having multiple pair bonds. And this is true of men and women, except men can benefit because they can. You can think of serial versus parallel. So men can have babies with multiple women at the same time, whereas women can only have one baby at a time, right? And so there's less benefit for a woman having multiple husbands than a man having multiple wives. And polygyny turns out to be pretty common across human society. So in the largest anthropological database that we have, 85% of human societies allow elite and high status men to take additional wives.
How was that study conducted? Like, who was the sample size?
Well, so back in the 1950s, anthropologists began putting together a database called the Ethnographic Atlas, which contains over 1,200 different societies. So it's and there's societies from all different continents, basically all the places where anthropologists had collected data.
And that was elite and high status males were permitted to take more than one partner.
Yeah, but even if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, so 90% of hunter-gatherer societies allow prestigious men to take additional wives. And they don't typically take many, but they might have two or three. Very rarely do you see more than four wives in hunter-gatherer society.
Why do you think that is? Just difficulties for the male to support more than four
females? Yeah. And so and the societies that do have monogamous marriage, it's typically because the men are too similar, right? So there's no benefit to
if there's a flat hierarchy.
Yeah. So if the men are more or less the same because of the nature of the economy, then polygyny doesn't appear.
Is polygyny just more efficient resource allocation then?
Well, I mean, that's what evolutionary biologists have argued, that if you give females the choice and there's high inequality among men, say in wealth, it would be fitness maximizing for them to allocate according to the available resources. So if you have a choice between being the second wife of a guy who's 3 times richer than your number 2 choice, then that's an easy choice. I mean, there's things with paternal investment and stuff because there's only one male and he can only do so much paternal investment. But if resources are the critical thing, having enough food, say, then that logic makes sense. But what it does do is that it'll inevitably create a pool of low status unmarried men if there's too much polygyny. And those are the guys who cause problems because they're faced with possibly being zeros in the evolutionary race. And so they are willing to take big risks in order to catapult themselves up the status hierarchy and have a chance to get into the marriage and mating market.
Are there any examples from history of times where there's been large swaths of sexless men at the bottom of this underclass?
Yeah, it appears lots of times. I mean, the places that we know best ethnographically are in these gerontocracies that appear in Africa.
What's that?
And these are
what's a geront?
So the gerontocracy is ruled by the old, essentially, and really it's old men. So what some societies have figured out is they put men through a series of initiation rites. And at various you have to be, you say you might have to be in your mid to late 30s to get through the final initiation rite, which allows you to finally take a wife. So that means you got this big pool of 20, 30 something men who are basically the warrior caste, the warrior class. And eventually they're going to pass through the rite, assuming they survive, and get to be old men and then get to be polygynous. But the older men are basically taking the younger women. So as soon as they're old enough to have babies, essentially, they get married off as wives to these older men. And then there's all these young guys roaming around. And this leads to a lot of conflict because you need to accumulate enough bride price. And so there's a lot of raiding and things like that. But lots of societies have had that. So places where the elite, in the Inca Empire, Aztec Empire, the elites all maintained large harems. And so if you look at the early descriptions from the friars, for example, that showed up in the Aztec Empire, they talked about how your average Indian, average Aztec man had trouble finding a wife because the elites had basically taken all the available women.
Yeah, you talk about the math problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea that when because males and humans tend to have one male and one female, you can end up with this huge pool of males when the elite males take all the women as wives.
It's not too far from what we're seeing in the modern world, though. I'm aware that it's not because polygyny is happening all over the place. In fact, even though marriage as an institution and religious rights and stuff are declining, and you can say that contraception and looser rules and norms around premarital sex and casual relationships and stuff like that, there is currently an asymmetry. I think the number of men reporting no sex between the age of 18 and 30 tripled since 2010. So in the last 10 years, that number's tripled. You also have women between the ages of 40 and 45. White women are the highest users of antidepressants at the moment. And that is sometimes pointed toward women who may have hit the wall and are looking at a future that is potentially childless without a family because they haven't been able to find a partner that they feel attracted to. So you have kind of two big swaths of both genders that neither of them are particularly happy with the situation. Both of them are single, but you end up, even though those women haven't been tied up by high status man at the top of the tree, you still get the sexless underclass of men. And presumably, whether it's because women have been captured by another man or women haven't hypergamously found somebody that they're fundamentally attracted to, the sexless underclass of men are probably not fantastic, no matter why the women aren't interested in them.
Yeah, no, it's the exact same logic, except here, what's happened over the last half century is that increasing female choice and female labor participation, female labor market participation, means that it's now an option for women to not get married. And there's strong evidence that women prefer males that are higher status than they are. And so that means that women were increasingly willing to just opt out of the marriage market entirely if they can't get a higher status man, which means you got this pool of men who can't get a date, basically. And apparently you can see this in data from dating apps. Like, there's a relatively small group of men who get all the interest from the women, and there's a whole bunch of men who never get a single message.
You said that getting married reduces a man's odds of committing a crime. Then when the man got divorced or their wives passed away, the likelihood of committing a crime increased again after that.
Yeah, so what the data looks like, it looks like monogamous marriage. Now, polygyny is a separate thing. Monogamous marriage domesticates males and probably even has a hormonal effect of reducing testosterone.
Reduce testosterone when you get married, and then again when you have children, I think.
When you have children. And that's this happens in lots of animals where you basically, if the male's going to invest in the offspring, you have to lower his testosterone, probably make a few other adjustments so that he's willing to protect the nest.
Oh, he's less disagreeable. He's less likely to get into risky behavior and get into a fight with someone and then be dead, and then the child doesn't have a father anymore.
Right. So he's not doing things to kind of show off and impress the girls. He's doing things like a father would do. And so what happens when they get divorced is they have to go back on the marriage and mating market. So T levels go up. And that means the risks of things like crime, things that would raise your status. You want to get some more money so you can buy a fancy car or whatever the relevant currency is for impressing
display you want
people.
To. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whatever your status display is, and yeah, so that's the consequence.
Rolling the clock forward, seeing this imbalance that we have in the sexual marketplace at the moment, and it doesn't really feel like either gender's fantastically happy with it. I'm not asking you to come up with like an applied solution, but what's your prediction if you were to roll the clock forward from here with regards to this imbalance, this sort of gender imbalance that we have in the sexual marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There could be a variety of technological solutions. So it could be the way, for example, a lot of people find their mates now on these dating apps. It could be the dating apps could be adjusted so there would be more chance for diverse matches. And, maybe that's going to happen through competition amongst different apps. Another thing is we don't know what's going to happen with sex robots and other kinds of fantasy play based on technology. So that seemed, one place to look is Japan, where there seems to be a lot of use of that kind of thing. And there's a whole class of males that have opted out of kind of the dating and marriage.
What's the name for those guys that live in apartments together?
Yeah, well, there's herbivores. I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of.
No, well, it's a Japanese word for it. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's like this, it's not ikigai, but it's something like that. But yeah, they call them, don't the Chinese call them like herbivore men or plant men or something like that? Because the Chinese are going through this, we need to make Chinese men manly thing right now.
Right.
They don't want anybody to look like K-pop stars, so they've restricted the amount of time that kids can play video games. Do you see this? Yeah, so they're only allowed to play video games between 8 and 9 p.m. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They're trying to sort of remasculinize Chinese men, and they look at the K-pop stars, and I'm sure it's called like plant men or vegetable men or something. Herbivore men might be it. And they don't want that. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I would like to hope that we could reinvigorate marriage as an institution. I don't know whether you saw today, but the Pope got in trouble. Well, the Pope trended on Twitter for saying that people who get pets instead of having children and building a family are basically not doing their civic duty as a human being. Okay. Which was a pretty outlandish thing for the Pope to say. That it's like enforced child rearing coming from the Pope. Someone did make a joke around the fact that if there's anybody that shouldn't be encouraging more children to be around, it's the Roman Catholic Church. They haven't got a fantastic record.
Yeah, they've got to work on their track record. But
yeah, I don't know, man. The sex robots thing's an interesting one. If you can,
and it's got no easy. I mean, there are some potential solutions, but it doesn't have an obvious one. I mean, clearly gender equality is not something we want to relinquish. So whatever the solution, it's got to involve gender equality, but that's going to lead to this problem.
Yeah, it's so strange to think back at the fact that there is absolutely no reason that women shouldn't have equal access to employment, to education, to the ability to gain status and prestige, and all of those sorts of things. But bizarrely, the fact that women were held back over the last, post-industrial revolution, but the last 40 years, let's say something like that, 30 years, that made it easier for women to find a relationship with a man that they were fundamentally attracted to because they weren't competing themselves out of the overall dominance hierarchy by rising up it. It's so weird. That dynamic's so fascinating and sort of stark and brutal as well.
Right. And then the tricky part is if you're a woman, the higher you go up the status hierarchy, the less attractive most men get, right? Because you only like men that are, at least you're equal, right? Really you'd like higher, but equal's probably okay. Lower, that just seems lame. Right?
Well, dude, think about how brutal it is that you can spend a decade building up your career or getting a PhD or doing a startup or whatever as some super high-performing woman, and then you think, right, I would also like to have a family. Let's look at the potential dating pool that I have. There's like 3 guys. There's 3 guys out of 7 billion people that are above and across from where you are. What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.